Welcome back to Broadcast Row here at CPAC 2024. Andy Mangione here hosting this edition of AMAC's Better for America podcast. I want to welcome back a good friend of AMAC, a frequent guest here. Thank you for joining us, Hans von Spakovsky, who is a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and a former commissioner at the Federal Elections Commission. We even talked about that, and I blew it. So I'm sorry. We're off to a great start, Hans. So thank you so much for joining us.
Andy, thanks for having me back.
Now, I know you and I, and among other people, have been working together since the 2020 election to realize exactly what the state of our elections are in, realize the decades-long head start the left has on us and as far as immersing themselves in every aspect of the election process. Okay, we're bearing down on November. I know it's only February, but you know how fast time goes. We're bearing down on a general election, a very important general election. If we could look at where we were in 2020 and where we are headed to in 2024 with regard to the security of our elections, the administration of our elections on a federal level, state level, and election integrity in general, we have made strides, haven't we, towards securing our elections?
Yeah, we're in better shape today than we were in 2020, but also that depends on what state you're in.
Okay.
As you know, we have a very decentralized election process. In fact, it's the most decentralized of any Western democracy. On the one hand, that means that some states are pretty good at this, other states are not. But it also helps prevent bad federal mandates from coming in. And as you'll recall, when Nancy Pelosi was in charge of the House, they tried to push through H.R. 1, which was this huge bill that would have basically had the feds take over the administration of elections, and it had terrible provisions in it, like one banning all voter ID laws. So, again, it depends on what state you're in. And many states have improved things. The one thing that the 2020 election did is it finally caused a lot of state legislators to realize, you know what? There are vulnerabilities in the system and we should try to fix them.
Right.
And so, for example, Georgia for years had actually had a very good voter ID law. Survived court challenge, required a government-issued photo ID, but it only applied to in-person voting. And what did the left do during the 2020 election? They used the COVID scare to say, oh, everybody needs to vote by mail. So the number of people using absentee ballots has gone way up. So what did Georgia do? They passed a bill that's extended their ID requirement to absentee ballots. And a number of other states have done the same, Texas too. Does that totally get rid of the problems with absentee ballots? No, but it makes them a little bit more secure. So those are the kind of changes. The other big thing that's happened is that, as you know, a big factor in the 2020 election was what we call zuckbucks.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Can you do kind of a deep dive on exactly what that is and how it affected the elections in 2022 and moving forward?
Mark Zuckerberg and some other big liberal donors gave about $450 million to a small nonprofit who in the past had a budget of about $1 million. And they then started giving money out as grants to election officials and election offices all over the country. Now they try to claim, oh, this was bipartisan. And it's true they gave a little bit of money to Republican-controlled districts. But the overwhelming majority of the funds they put out went to big urban city districts, strongholds for the Democratic Party, places like Philadelphia. What they essentially did is they moved the Get Out the Vote campaign that normally the political party has to pay for, the candidates have to, they moved that into government offices. And the results, all you have to do is look at turnout in the 2020 election, and you'll see that while turnout generally went up across the board, those areas that got those huge amounts of money and had government offices actually working to get out the vote for Democratic candidates, the increase in turnout there was larger than the turnout of more Republican districts, many rural districts. That made a huge difference in that election. What happened after that? at least 2 dozen states have banned all private funding of election officers, which is a good thing, so that won't be a factor in the upcoming election.
Still, more work needs to be done
Yeah,
to
it
get
does.
this third party money out of our elections.
Yeah, I mean, look, another issue that we've got is the fact that there's really not much to prevent people who are not U.S. citizens, in other words, aliens,
Yeah.
from registering and voting. Yeah, it's against state law. Yeah, it's against federal law, but the vast majority of states do absolutely nothing to verify that somebody is actually a U.S. citizen. And in places like California, which has the largest population of illegal aliens in the country, and where getting an voter ID card is a ticket to getting other forms of ID, there's really nothing to prevent people who are not U.S. citizens from registering and voting.
Let me ask you, Hans, is this now we run a poll every week for our members, and the poll this week we're talking about voting, non-citizens voting.
Right.
Okay. Is this a congressional issue? Is this a state issue? Or is it both? I mean, should Washington be dictating, showing proof of citizenship before voting? Or how should it be approached?
It's both a federal and a state issue. Okay, first of all, the federal government, the Department of Homeland Security, as you know, has a huge database of aliens who are in the country.
Mm-hmm.
But for years, they've put up every obstacle and red tape you can imagine to prevent state election officials from being able to check that database to see that somebody who's registering to vote, checking with the DHS database, see, well, are they really a U.S. citizen? So that's something the federal government could fix. The other problem we have is that there's some bad case law out there, I think misinterpretations of the National Voter Registration Act, or motor voter,
Right.
that say that states aren't allowed to ask for proof of citizenship when it comes to federal elections. That's a misinterpretation of the law, and it's something that I think Congress ought to fix. But states can do things like when they get information, jury information from state courts. Look, if somebody's called for a jury and that person's excused because they say, well, look, I'm not a U.S. citizen, that information needs to go to election officials.
Should their election or their voter registration be canceled?
Yeah, because where do most courts get their jury lists?
From
The voter registration list,
Exactly.
right. So that's just a basic thing. Or, in every state, if you're an alien and you're here legally, you can get a driver's license. A large number of states, unfortunately now, like California, also issue driver's license to illegal aliens. Well, state election officials should be checking with DMV so that when they get a registration, well, does this person have a license? And when they get a license, did they present documentation that they were not a U.S. citizen? That's just easy, basic stuff, and a lot of states aren't doing it.
Are there laws on the books right now to prevent this? And is the solution, could it be as simple as simply enforcing the laws that are already on the books?
Yes. Look, it is a felony under federal law for an alien to register and vote.
Okay.
But the Justice Department under Merrick Garland seems to have no interest whatsoever in enforcing that law. Another issue is that if you look at the application for citizenship, right? It's actually N-400 if somebody wants to look at it. In Part 12, it asks aliens, have you ever registered or voted in a U.S. election? What do you think DHS does with that information if somebody says yes?
Please tell me.
They sit on it.
Oh my.
That information ought to be sent over to the Justice Department for investigation, possible prosecution, because like I said, it's a felony under federal law, and yet DHS just sits on that information.
Hans, you had mentioned off camera before we started the interview about a GoFundMe page that has been set up to help President Trump pay his legal expenses.
Right.
And somebody asked you a question with regard to how legal this is with regard to election implications.
Yeah, I was
election law
asked.
implications,
I was asked
you know?
yesterday whether that a GoFundMe account like that is a violation of federal campaign finance law, since Donald Trump is a candidate for president. It's not, and the reason is that it's not his legal expenses are not a campaign-related expense. And so there's no violation of federal law for that kind of an account to be set up.
That's very interesting. Hans, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit with us here at CPAC on Broadcast Row. Always welcome back. I appreciate your deep reservoir of knowledge with regard to every aspect of elections. So
Right.
thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.